Hello everyone and welcome. This is my attempt to create a teaching video where I would like to show you how to interpret your own chart, or better said, how to put the general astrology, which you can hear on my channel and every other astrologer's channel, into context for you personally. So this is where we will ignore the sun signs, as in that you're, let's say, a Libra. So you probably listen to the Libra horoscope. This is where we are taking into consideration your own unique chart. So what the astrology playing out in the present moment would mean for you personally based on your house systems and their repartition. So before we can begin on how to even, start looking at your own chart, first we must understand the signs, why they are divided the way they are, and a little bit about them, each sign individually. And in this recording, I cannot go into the greater details, as in why a sign is considered, for example, the element that it does, cardinal or mutable or fixed, or why is a sign, before the other sign. All of these you can find, in the wisdom of the ancients. Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos is the foundation of Western tropical astrology. So that is where you can look for answers, or of course, you can research. There are so very many books, publications, courses online. Nadia Shah, for example, has some really, really good books, for example, Astrology Realized, where she goes into all of these details. So in this video, I'm just going to, present you more like the facts. So if you look at my screen, this is how you would, look at a star chart. Just that in this first chart that I'm using for exemplary purposes, now this is the sky of the present moment when I'm recording this, but I used equal house system, which means every single sign is one house here on this chart. Now, of course, in your chart, it will not look like that, but I'll get to that later on towards the end, the wrap up of this teaching video. So the signs, Aries is the first sign. And why? Because Aries starts the astrological new year. So basically the Aries equinox is, the first day, the first beginning of the astrological new year. So Aries is a cardinal sign, meaning exactly that it opens a season. Aries opens spring. So that's why it is cardinal. Cardinal signs have, what they have in common is that they have a lot to do with initiation, with action, with starting something. The energy where it is born and expresses itself for in its first form. So it is basically a sign, Aries in this case, where the very, very first rudimentary idea is born, and that is why Aries has a lot to do with the head, so to speak. But fellow cardinal signs are Cancer. So if you can see on the screen, these are positioned, cardinally, Cancer. Then the other one is the opposite sign of Aries, because these also work in axis, Libra. And then the opposite sign of Cancer, of course, Capricorn. Again, I repeat, what these have in common is that, first of all, they begin their respective season. Aries begins, as I said, usually spring, of course, depending on which hemisphere you are. Cancer begins summer. Libra begins winter. So we have the Libra equinox, usually when, sorry, autumn. When Libra begins autumn, when autumn, starts, we have the Libra equinox. And then, of course, Capricorn begins winter, the Capricorn winter solstice. Now, moving on, we have the other signs. So Taurus is a fixed sign, which means that it basically holds its season. It fixes it. So in Taurus's case, it fixes spring. Aries begins it, Taurus holds it. And the opposite sign of Taurus is Scorpio. So immediately Scorpio is also a fixed sign because they are, in pairs axis. And then the other fixed sign is Leo. Leo, of course, holds the summer. And the opposite sign is Aquarius. So Aquarius is another fixed sign where Aquarius holds the winter, while of course Scorpio does hold the autumn. Now moving on, we have the mutable signs. The mutable sign is where the sign is between seasons. For example, the first mutable sign, Gemini, it is between the end of spring and the beginning of summer. So because it's between the two, it is very, very adaptable, mutable. And of course, which means that the opposite sign of Gemini, Sagittarius, is also mutable sign. And then the other mutable sign is Virgo, and the opposite sign, Pisces. This is the mutable sign axis. So, as I said, cardinal signs are really, really powerful at starting things, expressing things, initiating. You know, for example, Aries is really, really good for a new direction. Anything that has to do with assertion, anything has to do with a very strong reaction, for example. Cancer is a very defensive sign. Anything that has to do with emotions, feelings, sense of safety and security, parenting, for example, that's where Cancer is at its most powerful initiation wise. Moving on to Libra, well, Libra is the only inanimate sign in the zodiac, so it's all about the other. Now, sometimes the other is not really a person, but something equally as inanimate, a situation, an institution, a tool, for example, or something, as I said earlier, inanimate. So this is where Libra initiates connections, union, alliance, friendships, or, for example, it initiates on behalf of another as a representative because Libra also rules the law and the justice. So, for example, a lawyer represents another person. That's like a Libra kind of initiation, where Capricorn, now Capricorn is the stage of manifestation. So it is everything that has to do with us and the external world. So it is something like career initiation. Let's build something together. So, this is more like bigger initiations, which don't just influence the person, but influence a collective, for example. So Capricorn is let's do things together. One of the things that Capricorn does rule is, for example, the state. So basically, top-down authority. Let's initiate something for the greater good, or sometimes the opposite of everyone. So this is the kind of initiation that these four signs have. Now, the fixity. First fixed sign is here, you can see Taurus. So Taurus holds value. Taurus is about everything that we embody. And everything that we embody, we have a very strong connection to it, a feeling to it. What does it mean to us? Taurus is usually associated either with nature, so the five senses, everything that represents an external stimuli, and how does that make us feel. So value and money and the financial energy of Taurus is derived from this, and Taurus likes to hold these in a fixed way. So likes to hold value, likes to hold everything that it loves, It likes to hold what it embodies. Now moving on to Leo, another fixed sign. So Leo has a lot to do with the heart, with passion, with creativity, with children. So the kind of fixity that Leo has is, of course, everything that has to do with what I mentioned earlier. So the fixity of the emotion, for example, loyalty, for example, love, for example, strong emotional commitment. And of course, Leo is the sign of the self. So our relation to our self-love, for example, we wish this to be as fixed as possible, of course, or our identity. We also need that to have a certain kind of fixity. Otherwise, we might be seen as, schizophrenics or with multiple personalities. Now, moving on, Scorpio. Scorpio is also a psychological and, of course, unconscious fixity. Better said, subconscious. Now, Scorpio is a very psychological, mystical, transformative sign in itself. So you can imagine when we transform, that also has a fixity to it, because it's not easy. A transformation is not just an adaptation, it is where we truly go into the basics and transform that way. Also, Scorpio can represent things that we lose or eliminate, but forever. For example, a parent, a loved one who we lose due to, natural course of life that is permanent. So again, the fixity of it, or a trauma that we heal, well, we heal it for good. Again, the fixity of this sign. Now, finally, Aquarius. Aquarius is fixed thought. Aquarius is a dichotomous sign, which usually represents the collective, the community, and the individual as well. So you can see the fixity of this relationship, because the individual cannot exist without the collective, neither the collective can exist without the individual. So this is like a fixed dynamic, fixed thought. And many times what is associated to Aquarius is that the greater good, which also needs to be have a certain kind of ideological, moral, or principalistic fixity, because a principle is not going to be a principle if it changes every single day. So this is the nature of Aquarius. Now, moving on to the mutable energies, Gemini. Now, Gemini is mutable because it represents our mental adaptation, our perceptions, and we adapt to life, to the flow of life, to every single day, due to what we perceive every single day, every single moment, and how our perceptions are interpreted. Well, that is basically Gemini, how we, again, mutable, how we mutate our attitudes, our course of action, and especially our mental sphere due to the external perceptions. For example, communication with someone, something that has been part of our life, like the influence of a sibling, what we learned from that sibling, etc., etc. Now moving on to Virgo, the other mutable sign. Now, what Gemini and Virgo have very much in common is that they're both ruled by Mercury, but I'll get to the planets later on in this teaching video. So it's very, very intellectual and mental as well, just that Virgo is Earth sign. So it has a kind of realness to it, applicability to it, as in the thought manifested into something like methodological or practical or down to earth. And because Virgo is so much associated with the mental sphere, again, how our thoughts, our problem solving skills based on, the intellect and ration and the interpretation of our perceptions, how does that shape and mold our everyday normality, routines, and reality. Because, a problem solving can also be seen as a certain kind of external element being transformed, changed, eliminated, upgraded, etc., by us. An action, of course, but that action was rooted in thought, in methodology. Now, moving on to the other mutable sign, Sagittarius. Now, Sagittarius is a mutable fire sign. So basically, it represents the higher thought, the higher principles, higher octaves of knowledge. Now, let me give you a very easy example to how Sagittarius is mutable. We learn something in primary school, uh, that would be Gemini, and that shapes our interpretation of reality in a certain way. Now we get to university and we look at that same element that we learned in primary school, but from the most sophisticated, philosophical, scientific, the- theological sometimes uh, point of view, and that changes everything. That changes how we look at that same specific thing throughout life forever, because that higher octave of knowledge, the results of perhaps years of research or academic work, is what adapt our perceptions basically. Or again, Sagittarius, traveling, seeing foreign cultures, foreign people, or appealing to the law in order to give us a different perception of something. All of these mutate our point of view, our worldview, our principles, and again, I have to say, our higher octave of knowledge. Now, last but not least, we have the final mutable sign, Pisces, which is the realm of the unconscious, which is also the realm of the spirit and the past. Now, regarding the unconscious, our unconscious feelings, everything that lies in our unknowing, the inner unknowing, buried in that deep, dark ocean of the unconscious, those elements can influence everything in our lives. Absolutely everything, from perception, mindset, interpretation of reality, personal methodology, know-how, everything. Our moods, our everything basically can be influenced by the unconscious forces. But at the same time, we also have an influence that we can leave on the unconscious. For example, healing traumas, going to a psychologist to understand ourselves, to understand those inner forces, everything that we achieve through spirituality, uh, esoteric knowledge. Now, this is how we kind of shape and mold our reality with the Piscean expression. The spirit, of course, is mutable by nature because it adapts to who it is that you are always. And of course, vice versa, hence the duality of Pisces. Now, after this being said, the signs are also, categorized by elements. Now, the element fire, Aries is a cardinal fire sign. Everyone who knows a little bit about astrology and the signs knows that Aries is exactly the initiator, the hard-headed, assertion, um, sovereignty. All of these have to do with the fires of passion within us reaching our head. Why head? Because that's when we decide to do something. The other fire sign is Leo, the inner passion, the fires of love, of sensuality, of the creational fire that burns within us, the heart space, that in its nature is a fiery energy. And finally, the third fire sign, Sagittarius, Well, our thirst for adventure, our thirst for knowledge, aiming as high as the starry sky, that has also a lot of passion attached to it, a lot of feeling, a lot of elation, optimism that burns within us. So that is, of course, also fiery. Now, the earth signs, Taurus is a fixed earth sign, and you could by now understand why Taurus is very much to do with earth, because we embody, our deepest faith through the sign of Taurus. Its lower expression is the lower ego, the inner animal, the unrefined, unconditioned animal, but that is also Mother Nature. That is also part of the earth. Now, Taurus also rules basically everything that has to do with natural element. For example, the crust of the earth, the physical earth, everything that has to do with metal, valuable metal, like coins, jewelry, everything that we use as a symbol of, social status or wealth or beauty. Taurus is ruled by Venus, but I'll get to that later on. Now, the other earth sign is Virgo. Virgo has also a lot to do with nature and the earth, especially the biosphere. Virgo usually rules animals which are smaller than a goat. And Virgo, as I said, we shape and mold the earth with our intelligence. So, Virgo, a mercurial sign ruled by Mercury, shows us everything that we can do, problem solve, but that also means change around the fixity of the earth, rearrange it, etc., etc. Adapt to it sometimes, but other times force it to adapt to us and our needs. And finally, the third earth sign is Capricorn, one of the most powerful and notorious ones because it is the sign of manifestation. In an esoteric way, Capricorn is the stage. What we wanted, what we desired, what we worked for, what we sacrificed for, into what we invested our mastery. And usually all of these elements need to be, ticked in the little box at the same time for the manifestation to be complete. That is what we get. So Capricorn is very much associated to big structures, like big cathedral, big building, because it is ruled by Saturn and it represents the solidity of our work and efforts. Whatever we put our energy into, that kind of grows and builds itself, builds something. So Capricorn can be seen the control that we possess over the earth. For example, Taurus might be a bit vice versa. What our senses have as control or as influence over us. Why our senses? Because Taurus rules the five physical senses. So we get a lot of serotonin and of course other hormones from that. That kind of determines our behavior and a lot in our lives. Now let us go to the element of air. Gemini is the first air sign. Air has a lot to do with the intellect. Air has a lot to do with our brainstorming, the electrical currents firing up in our neurons. And that kind of animates us mentally in a certain way. So air also represents the connection between us, between individuals, people and collective, people and even something ideological. So air is very much about our intellectual processes, our communication, and of course, travel. And Gemini has a lot to do with everything that I mentioned. Now, then there is Libra. Libra is, the sign of connection with the other. This is where we meet the other, the scales of justice. On one of the scales is us, our own thought, our own value system, our own philosophies, whatever, something specific about us. And the other scale is either the world or another person or something that we have to learn, something that is projected back upon us. So Libra is very multidimensional, but it is where we understand the world by understanding the other. Again, that is air. Because let's say we breathe in a little bit the air, the experience, the thought process of another, understanding the mind and mental sphere of another, that already represents us better understanding the world around us and, of course, ourselves through the contrast or the similarity, Libra again. And finally, Aquarius, well, Aquarius does represent our connection to the community. May that be our local community, group of friends, or in this day and age, the internet. So the whole human collective seen and in its integrity. Aquarius has also much to do with technology, technological research, science facts, science, what even the future of science. So you can imagine how all of this has much to do with the intellect, but also our higher intellect. So our aspirations, that which may be only science fiction in the present, but as we progress, it will become science fact. And the last 50, 100 years are relevant in this sense in so very many different shapes, ways, and forms. For example, just the mobile phone. A few, let's say, tens of years ago, it was science fiction where we were watching Star Trek, that they spoke on monitors and they saw each other. Few tens of years after, it's, our everyday normality. Now, let's move on to water energy. So Cancer is the first water sign. Water is emotional. It is intuitive. It uses the unconscious to bring it onto the surface. So Cancer has a lot to do with, parenting, family, safety, the Cancerian shell, local community, your roots. So you can imagine that there is a lot of emotional element attached to it, a lot of love, a lot of sense of belonging, and everything that you emotionally learned from other people, your family or your past, your circumstances. Because just as we learn things from an intellectual perspective, we also learn things, emotionally, how to emotionally react to this and that and that, and what emotionally certain things means or should mean for us personally. For example, physical infidelity. For certain people, it is a capital crime that can never be forgiven. For other people, it's not even seen as something negative. It is just respecting the liberty of another. So you see, emotional conditioning is very much part of our journeys as well. And there are certain things that we pick up. And again, they are part of our personal history, but there are other things which are very, very deeply personal. So we have to figure out our own authenticity, what certain emotions or certain emotional triggers means for us personally. Moving on to Scorpio, this is where we transform. The Scorpio usually represents the more murky waters because these are everything under the surface, the heaviest feelings, the heaviest emotions, jealousy, greed, everything that has to do with sexuality and sexual deviation. The word perv, what that might evoke, well, that is the domain of Scorpio. Of course, I'm not judging because what that means for us personally, it is up to us. But, for example purposes, everything that is sexually deviant, that might also fall into the rulership of Scorpio, secrets, things that we cannot forgive, things that weigh heavily upon us, trauma, etc., etc. These are all the domain of Scorpio. All of these we have to transform. or they will at one moment sooner or later geyser up to the surface, because no secret, no heavy feeling can be buried forever. And then moving on, the sign of Pisces. Well, Pisces, of course, is the realm of the unconscious, but in a wider sense. Maybe certain things in buried deep in our unconscious will never ever become, known by us. They will never reach our awareness. For example, past lives, things that we inherited from past lives. We may feel it as a talent, for example, but we might not get to the understanding that that specific talent that we are so grateful for in this existence was shaped and formed by many, many hours, days, years, even incarnations of work and mastery and perhaps sacrifice in previous lives. But of course, Pisces is also how we feel towards the spirit. It is our own spirituality. That is also very much watery and emotional energy. So basically, this is what we need to know about the signs. Now, a little bit about each and every sign. So beginning with Aries, I said quite a lot about Aries, the initiation, the assertiveness, the warrior-like energy of Aries, because Aries is very prone to stand up against injustice, to serve the self, to serve the plans, the initiation in the head. Hence, Aries also rules as body part the head. Moving, and Aries is ruled by Mars. So you can see the connection between Aries and fiery Mars, but I'll speak about the planets in just a little bit. Moving on to Taurus. So Taurus, as I said, has a lot to do with values, with our five senses, how loved we feel, because it's Venus and everything that we love in a very down-to-earth physical way. Taurus is not all that much philosophical. It is not all that much, ethereal. It is not just thought and emotion, and it is everything that is embodied. If it's thought, how that thought is embodied. If it's feeling, how that feelings looks like in physical reality. Now, let me give you an example. With Venus, especially, expressing love. Now, I love you, and just speaking about how much you love a person, that might work for Venus in Libra, but in Taurus, Taurus likes the bouquet of flowers or the physical touch and kiss and love expressed physically. So this is where Taurus is everything that we embody. Taurus rules the neck and usually the voice. Gemini. Now, Gemini is the sign of the sibling. In Ptolemaic astrology, Gemini ruled our siblings, our cousins, our neighbors, and everyone who we consider as brother, sister. So it has a lot to do with understanding the other as you would the self. So hence, Gemini has a lot to do with mental perception, how we perceive the world around us through our mind and the interpretation we give it. But this is the lower interpretation, the immediate interpretation. So everything that basically primary school prepares us for. And it is connection, communication, how we speak to others, how we speak about ourselves, etc., etc. So Gemini is very, very dynamic communication-wise, and what we speak about ourselves and show it to the world. Cancer, now Cancer, as I said, is a very powerful initiatory emotional sign. It has a lot to do with our sense of belonging. It has a lot to do with our past family-wise. It has much to do with our own parental instincts, our maternal side, paternal side, our relationship with children, our nurturing energies. For example, people who have Mars and maybe a few other planets in Cancer, and maybe it doesn't even matter which house it falls into, will have a very, very strong nurturing instinct where they take other people under their wing, they comfort other people, they give emotional support to other people, they're good cooks and share their food. These are just examples. Moving on to Leo, well, Leo has everything to do with the heart. Oh, sorry, I just want to mention that fixed star Sirius is in Cancer. So Cancer was very, very important to the ancients. It is a sign associated with Isis. So moving on to Leo, Leo is the heart space. Leo is the sign which governs the youth and children, even the inner child, creativity, relation to the self, especially self expression. So, hence, it is the home of the sun. The sun represents the light of our consciousness and our identity, the ego, what we project onto others. And ego wise, of course, self identity wise, and love. A Leo is usually the romantic center where the passions of love fuel us up to make a certain initiation. Then we move on to Virgo. Virgo is all about our gut. Oh, sorry, Leo rules the heart, and Cancer rules the breast and also the stomach, and also our stomach muscles. Um, So moving on to Virgo, Virgo rules the gut. It many times rules our common sense, the instinctual intelligence deep within our genes. Now, Virgo, of course, rules our problem solving skills, how we put the interpretation of reality to good use. But at the same time, Virgo also represents our connection to nature in an in a way that has a lot to do with intelligence. Like let me give you an example. As wild geese or other wild birds travel through continents and they always find their destination, that is where they have a very unique communication with nature's own intelligence. They just know. And that knowledge never ever serves them wrong. We human beings have the same, of course, in our own expression, have the same connection, have our own inner intelligence, and many times that solves problems. So Virgo is intelligent in that, and of course, it rules work and the service that we offer. In ancient times, it used to rule slaves as well. Moving on to Libra, well, Libra is the sign of law and justice. Libra has a lot to do with the kidneys and the endocrine system. It is an inanimate sign, so it is us and that very uh, various element that is on the other scale of the justice. It can be a person, it can be an institution, it can be a study, it can be anything, where we want to have an understanding or a relationship or a connection with. Libra very many times rules contracts, agreements, one-on-one alliances, and it rules romance, but in a rather philosophical way because Libra is ruled by Venus. Now, moving on to Scorpio. Scorpio, as you probably have heard by now, has a lot to do with transmutation, transformation, evolution, where we shed off our skin from a psychological, esoterical, and sometimes even down to earth perspective. Because let me give you an example: surgery, when something is removed from us, like a tonsil or appendix and stuff like that, that can very much be the expression of Scorpio, where Scorpio naturally rules the eighth house, which can have a medical elements attached to it. So healing and a disease, how we go through an illness and how that transforms us. And of course, the eighth house is secret, sexuality. Our Scorpio rules our sexual organs and the area of the body, the sacral area, so to speak, where our sexual organs are located. It has a lot to do with occult, alchemy, and ancient wisdom and knowledge applied. Sagittarius. Sagittarius is also a sign which has to do with the law, courts of justice, the external legislation, and the evolution of legislation, higher education, our biggest aspirations in life, our connection to foreign cultures, foreign philosophies, foreign religions, or our own religions, because sometimes Sagittarius rules religion as well. And basically, our higher octave of understanding life and our place in the universe. Capricorn. Now, I spoke so much about Capricorn. Capricorn is basically the classic ruler of the 10th house, the life path, everything that we want to do in the world, or the imprint that we wish to leave on the world. Capricorn is what effect we have on others, basically. How our control of the self, of mastery, of discipline, of our work, sacrifice, and efforts, how those have an effect on everything that is external. Aquarius, as I said, it is community and the individual. It is our connection to friends, group of people, or in a larger sense, people, groups of people who we share an ideal with, and we don't have to know those people. Like, for example, people who have the same faith. Those are connected in an invisible way for the simple fact that they share the same faith. This is one example of Aquarius. It can also have to do with social media, technology, evolution of technology, and your own personal hopes and dreams, your future, basically. And last but not least, Pisces. Pisces is the past. It is the sign of finalities. It is communion. It is compassion. It is the most sublime example of spirituality. But Pisces has two sides to it. So it can even be the opposite, the darkest, the most scary and frightening expressions of spirituality. You know, like hauntings, demons, witchcraft. That is Scorpio on one hand, but it's also Pisces. For example, escapism, the spirit, alcohol, drug substances. That is all much about Pisces, and Pisces rules the feet, and Aquarius rules from the ankles to the knees, that part of our locomotory system. And Capricorn usually rules the spines and bones, the tough structures within our bodies. So this is, you know, in a nutshell, the signs. Now, let us look at a little bit about the planets. So first of all, I'm gonna continue because I didn't say which planet rules which sign. So Aries is ruled by Mars. Taurus is ruled by Venus. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Cancer is ruled by the moon. Leo is ruled by the sun. Virgo is ruled by Mercury. Speaking about Mercury and Gemini, according to Socrates, Mercury is at home in its daytime expression in Gemini. It's very easy to make this internal association. Gemini is the public speaker. Gemini is the communicator, which stands before people and, you know, expresses the subject of the communication. So you can see it's solar expression here. Now, with Virgo, that's the nighttime expression, where that communication can just be like a conclusion, like a note, like a scientific work which details the thought process of the hypothesis. So it's not always communicated directly. It is the end result of the intelligence. So laboratory analysis, for example, Virgo, a communication, but it's not very much solar. It is more like in its nighttime. Libra is ruled by Venus. Again, the same thing. Libra is the daytime expression of Venus, the celestial Aphrodite, because love here can be platonic, can be just the thought of love. For example, love, equity, something that has a lot to do with Libra. You want the other to be fair, equal to you for the sheer sake of unconditional love. A Taurus, on the other hand, is the nighttime expression of Venus. So there it has to be embodied. It has to be shown, expressed physically in one way or another. For example, kiss, touch, bouquet of flowers, the ring, etc., etc. Now, Scorpio is ruled by the ancient ruler of Scorpio is Mars, and the modern ruler is Pluto. Now, I would suggest sometimes to take into consideration both of the rulers, because when Mars is in the sign of Scorpio, it's like in its home sign. So it's extremely powerful. Now, moving on, Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, planet of expansion, planet of justice, the truth, subjective truth, most of all. Moving on, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. Now, this is very, very, self-explanatory. Saturn, the structure, the authority, how things should be. And even with manifestation, it is Saturn that decides what can manifest in physical reality and what not. The same Jupiter. Jupiter is the aspiration, the truth, that which is not yet physical, which brings down the manifestation, but ultimately, regardless of what Jupiter deems to be true or not, it is Saturn who has the final word. Moving on to Aquarius. Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, the modern ruler, but the classic ruler is Saturn. Why Saturn? Because fixity. Even Aquarius has a Saturnian sign to it. You might say that aren't Saturn and Uranus almost like dichotomous to each other, the opposite? Well, yes, absolutely, but Aquarius is also like that. It is dichotomous. It is dual, but in a way where that duality never ever meets at a common point. That duality stays as duality. So Aquarius also has that sign of side, better said, of Saturn to it, where, social security, for example, criminal activity, that which has a very strong social danger and risk to it, will not be made tolerable or legal. That's Saturn, criminal justice system, the authority. And finally, Pisces. Pisces, is modern ruler is Neptune, and the classic ruler is Jupiter. So why Jupiter rules Pisces? Well, it is all about the magic, but the magic which is, in our unconscious, that which we focus on, that which exists in the realm of the dreams, that which we, influence ourselves to believe in, that of course is expanded and made our reality. But the modern ruler as well, Neptune. Neptune is basically the source of the spirit. So very, very much Piscean-like, and the grand illusion of all things and lies and deception, that's very much Piscean as well. So now you see the rulers of the different signs. Now, I'm going to speak just in a nutshell about the planets. So we can split the planets into two, and in the modern times even three categories. We have the inner planets, the personal planets, and the personal planets are usually very quick moving. They they revolve around the zodiac either once a year, something like that, on and off, where Mars needs usually 2 years. Now, the outer planets are slower than that, and I'm gonna speak about them just in a tiny bit. But first, let's close the inner planets. So the inner planets represent something very, very personal. They influence our lives very directly, and hence they move very, very quickly because life changes. Life is never ever the same. Even our daily routines, our daily life have so very many aspects to it. There are Venusian aspects, everything that is pleasurable, value, money, transaction, everything that is mercurial, communication, what we think, how we interpret reality through our thoughts, everything that we learn. When we watch TV, social media, that's very much mercurial. There is Martian elements, what it is that we express, that we do, our reaction, our initiation, our action, basically. And then there are things which have to do with the moon. So the moon is also a personal energy. In ancient times, it was categorized as a planet, but let's call the sun and the moon the luminaries. So the moon influences so very much personally our mood, our emotional reaction, our unconscious, our dreams, our state, how we react to so much that, stimulates us in so very many different ways. So the moon is one of the most personal energies, and the sun, our ego, what we express, what we think about ourselves, what we do with ourselves, how we use our personal image, etc., etc. So the sun and the moon are the king and queen of the sky. So those influences the most. That is why, the sun sign is so very popular, because wherever our natal sun is, of course, will determine our conditioned self. And that is 50% plus. So a lot of things that we saw and picked up from life and how we were conditioned, of course, they become us because we integrate it. But at the same time, the sun is also what we show, what we express. Like, for example, an artist, that's very much their sun illuminating the expression of their inner world, how they lived a certain area of life, what experiences they had, what teachers they had, what their relationships. So very, very complex. Mercury is the planet which has a lot to do, again, with intelligence, with our problem solving skills, with how we interpret reality and the external. Also, our own personal self talk, how we communicate with the self and internal forces, how we communicate with another person, our travels, how we use intelligence, technology, and everything to solve our problems and get along life. Uh, then we have Venus. Venus is everything that we love, everything that stimulates us sensually, our five senses, in the sign of Taurus, but also everything that we love intellectually, just in thought, just in principle, just in philosophy, Venus and Libra. And of course, Venus has a lot to do with transactions, money, financial values, movable goods. Movable goods is everything that is not fixed, like a house or a property is an immovable good. But everything like car and cash and bank cards and a talent that it isn't expressed yet, all of that is movable goods. So it is at your disposition. So Venus also rules currency and stuff like that, collectively speaking. Moving on to Mars. Now, Mars is, of course, is the planet of action. Even its glyph, the circle and the arrow, where our energy is directed towards. So Mars is very much about how we take action, when we take action, in which measure we express our energies as action. It also rules our reaction, our inner states, but which are fiery. For example, frustration is very much Martian in the sense that it's a blocked energy where it's built up and it cannot express itself. Mars cannot express it, so of course it is like an inner fire that kind of burns us. Very many times depression can be Martian as well, because we cannot live something, we cannot take action, or something cannot enact within us, and we feel stuck and depressed, etc., etc. Mars is also sometimes in certain configurations a sexual planet, and especially when it holds conversations to Venus. Venus is the female principle, Mars is the male principle. So aspects between Venus and Mars very many times say about attraction, sensuality, sexuality, love, stuff like that, and connections and partnerships. Then we move on to the social planets, Saturn and Jupiter. Jupiter, as I said, Jupiter is the planet of justice. What justice, what equilibrium, what truth, what the wisdom of the whole human collective means for us personally. Jupiter is our deepest faith, our worldview, and Jupiter basically is how we understand the world in the highest of our capability of understanding, if that even makes sense. Like, again, we may understand a certain issue in a mercurial way. So in a very Gemini way, we understand the facts that, for example, the sun, when the sun is on the sky, there's daytime. It shines, it illuminates. Now, a more Jupiterian version of this is the solar system and the complex process of why the sun is on our sky. What is the sky? What is the sun? You know, a more academic understanding. But at the same time, this can be a religious understanding which has the same force and power as an academic understanding. For example, the divine texts or the wisdom of the ancients says that the sun is the light of our source of our life, source of all life, and it is meant to be on the sky. That acknowledged, accepted, and elevated to the degree of knowledge that is absolutely equivalent to a scientific understanding. So Jupiter, what truth and what knowledge is for us personally. Saturn, on the other hand, is our structure. Saturn is how we judge life and everything in it. And when I say judge, for some people, yes, it's more malevolent, as in judging, the bad type of judging. But when I say judging, I really mean discerning right from wrong, but based on our Jupiter, based on our worldview, based on our Venus, what value is for us personally, based on our Mercury, our intelligence, IQ, based on our moon, EQ, emotional intelligence, based on our sun, what life has shown us until that present moment. But it is still Saturn which gets to the crystallization of all the other energy in astrology. That means our where we are the inner judge. We decide what we want in our lives, what we don't want in our lives. We decide how our lives should be lived, what is true value, what is fake value, not just materially, but also philosophically, spiritually, religiously, economically, scientifically, in any way, shape, and form. So the structure of our lives is usually represented by Saturn. And why are they social planets? Because it's not just us, neither Jupiter or Saturn, it's also us and the rest of the world, the rest of the human collective, past, present, and future, let's say. Past, well, past, the history of our species, our nation, our ethnic origins determines a lot, you know, in a Jupiterian way, what we aspire towards. And even in a Saturnian way, what kind of, and how should I express this, tendencies are woven into our genes. Some nations, some ethnicities are, for example, more uh, susceptible to assertion, aggression than others. Others are more susceptible to problem solving, for example, meticulous work than others. Others are more susceptible to celebration, siesta, living life through the heart than others. You know what I mean? Everyone, and that's Saturn. But the external Saturn, or external Saturn, what does your government allow you? That's so very much a social aspect of Saturn. Now, until Saturn, so Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, these planets and these energies were known by the ancient Ptolemy, the Tetrabiblos. Saturn was considered the very end of our solar system, our reality, the physical world. Everything that lied beyond Saturn was either divine or abyssal, something that was not meant for us to be all that much aware of. But from the 1700s, with the discovery of Uranus, hence Uranus being also the ruling planet of astrology and astronomy alike, these new planetary archetypes became, part of our collective consciousness. So Uranus is the planet of technology. Uranus is the planet of higher thinking. Mercury's higher octave, because this is where it's our intelligence as a species, as a collective, the shared intelligence, the maximum peak of humankind's intelligence. Uranus is also the planet of revolution, of uprising, of rebellion. The French Revolution is so very linked to Aquarius and Uranus type of energy. Yet, personally speaking, it just shows us where our most ingenious quality lies, but it's very much social and outer planet. So again, even personally speaking, it has a lot to do with the external, with collective, with humankind and the times that we live in. Because that is how their external expression comes to the inner expression. Neptune. Now, Neptune is the divine source. But that divine source says that everything in life is just an illusion. Our perceptions give us the illusion of reality. Now, that illusion can be more superficial, where our senses are tricked to believing something, seeing something, etc. Or it can be much deeper than that, where a creational energy, the spirit, the source swells up from deep within us and expresses itself. So that is more like a spiritual, miraculous, more esoteric expression. This Neptune is Venus's higher octave. So its highest expression is unconditional love, the spirit of communion, the Christ consciousness. So you see that we had to have a spiritual history as a species for that Neptune even to make sense. Because Neptune represents our higher quality, but also our lower quality. Because Neptune is also the malevolent aspect of the spirit, demonic, etc., etc. Or just alcohol. Alcohol can do a lot of harm. And don't see it physically speaking, see it emotionally. A violent husband, violent wife, etc., etc. Then there is Pluto. Now, Pluto is the most potent and slowest moving modern planet here. Uh, Pluto represents our power. Pluto represents where we need to transform, where we need to change. But again, it's a social planet because it's very, very karmic. Karma has to be interwoven deeply in our lives in order to play out. Family karma, but family karma is linked to social karma, but social karma is linked to the times that we live in. The times that we live in are linked to the history of the country or community, and that is linked to the history of human. So you see, this is Pluto. And Pluto usually, collectively speaking, reveals the strong corruption. Personally speaking, it may reveal where we were victims of some kind of bad power or corruption. Bad power like political collapse or a bad political. You get what I'm saying. Now, let me show you other energies that can also be included just like planets. So we have the ascendant. The ascendant is not a planet, but a calculation, a point in astrology, a cardinal point, which is deeply personal. The ascendant represents when you're younger, the genes, the genetic configuration that you enter this world into, everything that you inherited genetically or energy wise, primordial, instinctual energy wise, either from your, parents and your family line, but genetically, before any education, you know what I mean? The deep rudimentary instincts or from past life. But later on, the ascendant is who you ascend to, the person who you want to become, and you have great deal of liberty over this later on. And usually that part of the ascendant comes online after the first Saturn return, 28, 30, 35. These ages, depending on what maturity means for the person individually. So the descendant is exactly how others conditioned you. What I said with the sun, the conditioned self, well, that is very much the descendant. What kind of imprint do your relationship connections, first of all, of course, parents, family, leave on you? What you learn from them, how you adapt to this, one-on-one alliances, negotiations. You're a certain kind of person at school, then at work, then in higher education, then as a partner, as a wife, as a mistress, everything, every relation and every connection, how you are with your enemies, seventh house rules the enemies as well. And with the descendant, many times in life, we have to unlearn or we have to stop ourselves from being our conditioned self exactly in order to give way to our authenticity. But other times we have to condition our authenticity, our ascendant, especially if we want to be a loving husband, wife, etc. Because any partner comes with their own, unique set of personality and things they need to experience in life. So an opposition always is the compromise, is the middle path, the balance between the two. Now, another very important point in astrology is the midheaven, MC. The midheaven is the top of the sky. And it's very, very important because it represents where you rise, where you have the most power of expression in your life, what you leave on the world. Well, its opposite point, the IC, the imum ciel, or I'm not sure how to best pronounce it in Latin. IC is the roots, you know, where you have your family, your physical house, uh, how you made life your own. Where is your stability in life? It is much more like a very, very personal oriented energy. What makes you happy in life? Where the IC, the MC, sorry, this is the MC is what kind of power do you want to have over life? Where do you want to take your life in a general sense? Soul path, life path, career, etc., etc. So these points are very, very important in astrology. Now, other energies that you might come across, part of fortune. Part of fortune and vertex, you can see that here and here are also calculations. Part of fortune in a birth chart usually represents where you have the most personal power and fortune. Vertex is everything that doesn't depend on you, where fate kind of comes into your life in the most predominant way. So vertex is like fated connections, fated partnership, fated elements that don't depend all that much on you, where the part of fortune is what depends on you, your fortune basically. Uh, Black Moon Lilith. Black Moon Lilith is a lunar calculation which represents our most animalistic instincts, impulses, our basically darkness, that part of ourselves which is in the border between unconscious and conscious, and it's usually primal, violent, and apologetic, the darkest feelings, even though Black Moon Lilith has her own truth and her own wisdom. Then there is the lunar node. So the north node in the birth chart is your path forward, your karmic path forward. What you need to build, realize, karmically speaking, what type of energy activity makes you go forward in life. South node is usually what you inherited. South node is usually what you have excessively in your life and need to alchemize or eliminate or balance out. Many, many times, South node can be, for example, a talent. You might say, well, a talent is absolutely wonderful. Well, not as much if that becomes your whole life. Then is when you have to eliminate it. Use it to something so that it gives way to your other sides of your being. While other time, of course, it's like a trauma, like something negative that has happened. Other times, even past life energy that we need to release. And let me show you a few asteroids now. So certain asteroids that may be relevant. Ceres is the biggest asteroid. Ceres is everything that has to do with nurture, food, diet, goddess of grain. So how we nurture, or very many times she, depending on where she is in the chart, is cooking skills or how we nurture other people. Then we have Pallas Athena, wisdom, tactics. She has the nature of Mars, where either she gets what she wants with intelligence, if not sheer force. Then we have Juno, asteroid of partnerships, marriage, connection, one-on-one alliances. Vesta is protector of the household, goddess of the sacred flame. It represents our sense of protection, not just in a real sense, because that would be, for example, Saturn or IC or fourth house, but also spiritually. Then we have planetoid Eris. Aries is where our rebellious nature lies, where our fight for sovereignty, our fight for individuality in a rebellious way sometimes. Then a really important planetoid which you may find in various different astrological works is, let us begin with dwarf planet Orcus. Orcus is like an anti-Pluto. If Pluto reveals corruption, Orcus reveals the same corruption, but how to amend it. Pluto, how to eliminate it, transform it, cast it out. Orcus, how to build something new in its place, how to make it work, basically. There is also dwarf planet Haumea. Haumea represents our quantum creational sense. This is where how we can heal parts of our lives or whatever the theme is, tapping into our deepest intuitive ingenuity. Chiron, of course, Chiron is the asteroid of healing, the centaur, the wounded healer. It does reflect either our own wounding, especially the natal Chiron, where life has wounded us and what that wound kind of made us do in life. And the transiting Chiron represents where the wounding, the potential of wounding is in as we go along life. Then we have Sedna, an asteroid, a planetoid representing sacrifice. Sacrifice in a good way. Where does sacrifice get us along in life, but also in a negative way? If we overdo it, what kind of pains and not so nice inner expressions can it produce in our lives? We also have Ixion, another centaur planet, which represents trickery, lawlessness, how we evade the law, for example, or how we get out from a tricky situation. There is, for example, Quawar, an energy which represents our artistic skills, our handcraftship, what we can do with, our creational energy, maybe artistically, but this isn't the Neptunian kind of art. This is the practical crafts, maybe like certain arts which are passed down by folk in our nations. That kind of talents might be highlighted by Quawar. And Varuna does represents our justice to the cosmic law and nature, the rules and the balance within nature. Maki here is a representation of what we can do with our spiritual playfulness. For example, song and dance, the inner rhythms within us that guide us to certain things in life and to like certain expressions. And, any other dwarf planet, you will probably hear its interpretation in a horoscope. And I would like to show you the final. White moon Selena is like the higher octave of what our emotional maturity and the power of our emotions can lead us to, guide us to, because it is like an opposite of Black Moon Lilith. White moon Selena represents the nobility and the magic within our souls. So with this being said, let's look at a star chart and the houses. So let's say that we're gonna look at the chart of someone who was just born now. As you can see, this is where the houses and the house cusps are not linear. And basically, this is the essence of your astrology lesson. So the first house begins with the ascendant. And the software usually points this out. And when I say software, I use a program called Planet Dance, but if you want to get your birth chart, if you want to just look at your house positions, your planets, where they are, you can go to so very many birth charts and they will generate a free chart for you. One of the most best sites that I would recommend and use personally is cafe.astrology. Their chart is really, really easy. And you also have interpretations for free attached to it. And they just tell you which house is where. So the ascendant. If this person would have been born right now, you see they have ascendant in Sagittarius, 9 degrees, 38 minutes of Sagittarius. And then we have the first house. The first house is Sagittarius, but it leads on to Capricorn as well. And what does that mean? The first house is about the self. Everything that I mentioned with the ascendant is also, applicable here. But the first house also rules physical appearance, what you project onto other people, what you do with yourself, with your life, relation to the self. So Sagittarius would mean the classical exception of Sagittarius, of optimistic, really thirsty for knowledge, for travel, for justice, for truth, a strong personal magnetism and magic, Sagittarian. But it leads on to Capricorn, so all of that's made with practical, responsible, a leader type of person. Then we go to the second house. So the second house is at 14 degree 24 minutes of the Capricorn cusp. So this is where the second house would begin. So the predominant energy is Capricorn, but it leads into Aquarius. The second house rules money, finances, all of your movable goods, all of your movable values, self-worth, self-esteem, and investments, what you want to do with your money, material situation, etc. Now, Capricorn second house would represent this person is an entrepreneur, hard worker. They want to, have their own livelihood due to their business or be as independent as possible or a leadership role. And then Aquarius, ingenious, social media or communication, serving a group of people might be keys to a very favorable and balanced material life. And of course, humanitarianism and everything that might have to do with Aquarius. So where is your second house cusp? The third house rules mind, mental sphere, especially the lower mind, lower education like kindergarten, primary school, and anything to do until university. Cousins, siblings, neighbors, and everyone else who you regard as a brother, sister, even spiritually speaking, and shorter distance travels, and in modern times, social media. So where is this third house cusp? In this case, in this example, it would be at 26 degrees of Aquarius, and just put it into interpretation. The fourth house begins the cusp with the IC, the roots, very, very important. And the roots in this case will be at 3 degrees and 21 minutes of Aries. So the IC will be just as important as that ascendant. What does this say about you? What does it say about your history? What comfort, what stability, what a stable and good life means to you personally. And then the fourth house, what is the configuration of the fourth house? What planets are there? The fourth house is your family, what type of parent you are, what nurture means to you, and everything that has to do sometimes even with your own parents. Then we have the fifth house. So the fifth house in this case would be at 0 degrees 57 minutes of Taurus. Fifth house is heart space, creativity, love, but the sensual love, sex, romance, children, your own inner child, self-expression, being on the spotlight. Actors have, for example, and public people have very strong fifth house positions. Are there any planets here? And fifth house also rules risk. So, moving on to the sixth house. Now, the sixth house is daily routines, the service that you offer. If you're connected to specialists, like people who offer a service themselves, physical body, the gut, the digestive tract, and basically, if the 10th house, the MC, is career, then the sixth house would be what you do on an everyday basis for that career. In our example, this is the cusp is at 21 degrees 55 minutes of Taurus. What planets are there in this sixth house? That will help you with the interpretation. The descendant I've spoken about. So exactly your relationship, what kind of imprint, impact do your connections other people leave on you? And vice versa. What do you project upon them as well? Then this is already the seventh house. So the seventh house begins with the descendant. In this case, it will be 9 degrees of Gemini. And the seventh house does represent marriage, of course. This is the, but replace marriage with relationship, one-on-one alliance, association, friendship, marriage, even enemies, so one-on-one, you and the other, and contracts, and everything that has to do with law and justice. Then we have the eighth house. The eighth house does represent transformation. It does represent, it's also a financial house because it's the opposite of the second house. So money, especially that money, resources, values that other people share with you and you share with other people. For example, you with parents, you at your job before the money gets into your own pocket, inheritance. This is also a psychological house, traumas, your psychological efforts of the moment, how you want to transform anything that has to do with secrets, sexuality, sexual deviance, sexual fetishes, the occult, application of psychology, investigation, spirituality. Yes, the eighth house is quite complex. Ninth house is higher education. People who go to uni have strong placements here. Your relationship with the law. The ninth house is also a house which governs legal cases, legal situations. Legal workers, for example, usually have Saturn or another important planet in their, like Mars, for example, in the ninth house. It governs spirituality, religion, foreign travels, relations with foreign countries, and specialization, your own specialization. 10th house begins with the MC, midheaven. I've spoken about that, very important, what your soul calling is. But the rest of the 10th house, how it's executed, where your soul will guide you, what impact will you have on the lives of others or a community or energy-wise or spiritually, basically the soul path. In this case, the MC will be at 3 degrees of Libra, and it incorporates most of the sign of Libra. Moving on, the 11th house. The 11th house is friendships, group of friends, karmic friendships, karmic bounds. Then the 11th house is also your hopes and dreams. Dreams in the sense that what do you aspire towards? Your highest principles. And what kind of principles do you share with others? And finally, the 12th house. The 12th house represents your unconscious. It represents the world of the psyche, the distant past, sometimes past lives, and your spirituality. So how to interpret your birth chart? Well, you need to know your cusps. First house, second house, third, etc. the cusps. Why? Because you will need to place the transiting planet in there. Like right now, you see the transiting planets in there. You know, let me make this simpler for you. So we would have Mercury in Virgo, of course. This for that person would be in the 9th house along with the sun and the moon and Black Moon Lilith, because Black Moon Lilith is in Leo still, and their 9th house cusp is 0 degree and 57 minutes of Leo. You see here. Actually, no. It is their 8th house cusp. No, 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 no. Yeah, sorry. So the 9th house cusp is actually at 26 degrees and 13 minutes of the sign of Leo. Because I should have looked at the 3rd house and to apply the opposite. So yes, so Black Moon Lilith is also part of this virtual fictional person's 9th house. The 8th house would have Venus in there. The 6th house would have Uranus in there. And Jupiter is in the 5th house. The North Node is 4th house along with Chiron. Neptune and Saturn in the 3rd house. And Pluto in the 2nd house. Again, midheaven would be in Libra, ascendant in the sign of Sagittarius, IC in Aries, and descendant in Gemini. So when you hear an astrology update, so let's say in the present moment, I would be speaking about that very soon Mercury is starting to stand still in the sky, stationary direct on the 15th of September. And while doing so, what does this mean for you personally? Which house does it fall into? Because its symbolism is greatly amplified. So you would be hearing this phrase in an update. So you search for where Mercury stands still in the sky. That will be at 8 degrees of Virgo. You ask yourself, okay, so where is 8 degree of Virgo in my personal chart? So you draw the chart and you see Virgo. So Virgo, the integrity of the sign of Virgo in this particular example would fall in the 9th house. So you look for the 8 degree of Virgo in that 9th house, and that's where that Mercury standing still, stationary Mercury, would influence you. So if it's in your 9th house in this example, you know that either communication, something that has to do with justice or official matters from an institution, from the state, from the local council, from anything like that, or your own travels, maybe an student exchange program, your studies, your worldview. So you will very easily put this into context because that is 9th house, but then add to it Virgo, intelligence, brainstorming, purity, discerning right from wrong. So sometimes using discrimination in the sense that Mercury retrograde taught me that this wasn't good for me, but it also highlighted and showed that my path is here. So put all of that into context for yourself. And, always when looking at your birth chart, look if the transiting planet is not conjunct or holding an aspect with a personal planet. In order for you to see this, I have to modify this chart. So I'm gonna put another year, 1998, let's say, so that this person's planets will be different. So this would be their natal chart. And now, this is how the sky looks like in the present moment. Ignore the clock face, ignore the houses. This is just the present position of the planets. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put one chart atop of the other. But you don't really have to. You don't need to complicate yourself because you know your natal chart and you also know where which planet is in the present moment, the transiting planet. You can just put them together mentally. So if you would be born, today would be your solar return. So that means natal sun conjunct the transiting sun's birthday, solar return, is when these two suns are conjunct. And you would also see that your natal Venus would be conjunct the transiting Mercury. So interpret that, put it into context. So context of the Mercury retrograde season, it not just highlighted something about, your justice or paperwork or what you need to solve study-wise, but how much you love it or not love it, because you're natal Venus. So this is basically how you apply it. And maybe I will have a separate teaching video about the major aspects and how to interpret it for yourself. But I think I'm going to leave it at this. So again, as a final conclusion, after you understand the nature of the signs, the specifics of the signs, the houses and what they do, you can just build it up as a Lego, basically. By looking at your chart, you will know the first house, what it does, but you also know the nature of Sagittarius, and you also know what planet does what. Venus, as I told you earlier, the pleasure principle and money and values and everything that has to do with passivity, us attracting something, wanting something, desiring something. So you can very, very easily put it into context. And then when the astrologer says that a transiting planet does this and that in this and that sign at this and that degree, you just look for it where it is in your own chart and just put it into context. Which house, and if it holds anything with any personal planet, even if it's not, just knowing in which house and which area, that already gives you a really, really, really good clue. So thank you so much for listening. I really, really hope that this was helpful. And until next time, bye for now.